Moving from a large, established bank to a digital challenger is not just a change of employer. It means shifting from traditional advisory-led wealth management to a platform-driven investment model. From legacy structures and complex governance frameworks to speed, transparency, and scalability. After nearly 2 decades at Nordea, Tine Vestergren Uldal made exactly that move. Today, she leads Nordnet Denmark. In this episode, we explore what that transition says about the structural evolution of wealth management in Denmark and whether the future belongs to traditional advisory models, digital platforms, or something in between. Hi, and welcome to Wealth Insider, a podcast by Performativ. This is where industry meets insight, where we sit down for honest and engaging conversations with voices from every corner of the financial world. Together, we explore trends, strategies, and partnerships that are shaping the future of wealth management. Wealth Insider brings you closer to the people and the ideas that are driving the industry forward. Welcome back to Wealth Insider. I'm your host, Christian Lindvall, Global Commercial Director at Performativ. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Tine Vestergren Uldal, Country Manager Denmark at Nordnet. Before joining Nordnet, Tine spent 18 years at Nordea in senior leadership roles across wealth management, investment advice, product governance, and institutional client coverage. Tine, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We're thrilled to have you here. I think as mentioned in the intro, so you spent nearly 2 decades at Nordea, correct? Started in risk and compliance and then sort of weaved your way into more senior leadership roles. Can you tell us about that career arc? I'm super curious to hear.
Yeah. Well, you can say that my beginning in risk and compliance was very linked to my education. So I was trying to figure out a way of bridging regulation and finance and so on. And risk and compliance just seemed like the obvious choice. And it learned me a lot about the financial industry and the business because I jumped in right before the financial crisis hit. So I learned a lot from that period, and a lot of things changed in terms of how you did compliance, how you did risk management. So it was a super, super efficient way of getting into the business and understanding the full business. It was within our asset management unit in Nordea. And it was just some very interesting and fruitful years in terms of learning. So it was a steep learning curve, but it was a really good way in to the business. And then I jumped into more of a work with strategic development, and I wanted to leap into not just being in second line of the business, but actually in the front line. And that's when I started out working with institutional clients. So that gave me some very good insights as to understanding customers and why you can't just put all the customers into different boxes. They are all individual and they want it different ways. So it was a really, really strong learning from me. Then I moved into what we call the bank side of Nordea. There was MiFID II being implemented, and that changed a lot for the financial industry in terms of a new wave of regulation, you could say. And that is where I started working with product governance. We built up a new team and found a new structure for how to work with product governance, making sure that the right products came out to the right customers. And that was the kind of first step into the more advisory side. That was the next step because of course, the business in Nordea was very much built on giving investment advice. And then I took my next step after having a break on maternity leave. I came back and then I started working with advice. So I was part of a team that was responsible from end to end for the both advisory process, the governance around the advisory process, the system development, so the advisory tools that all of the advisors were utilizing, and the implementation of such. So that was a really good way of understanding end to end what hit the customers. How do you turn something that is regulation and sometimes super complex into something that is actually useful for the customers?
Maybe that's a good jumping off point then to ask the next question, which is you did all of this and you were tasked with delivering this sort of end-to-end wealth advice.
Yeah.
So strategic projects that were probably quite large and very important to the bank.
Yes.
Having worked with banks, there are strengths and limitations everywhere, but what were some of the strengths and limitations for you and how you delivered in each of your roles?
So there's no doubt that Nordea is a super tanker, right? It means that you have extremely skilled people that are very good at what they're doing, but you also have, in my case, 4 different countries, 3 different distribution channels or customer segments that we needed to cater for. So that in itself, of course, led to a lot of complexity. So you really had to find that bridge between making something that from a regulatory perspective was strong governance, of course, but at the same time was adding value to the advisors and in the end adding value to the customers. Because if the advisors didn't want to utilize the systems or the process because it was too complex, then in the end it wouldn't add any value for the customers. But it also meant that you had to, of course, find a good way of maneuvering in an organization where you have very different viewpoints, both from a customer perspective, but also from a regulatory perspective. So even though Nordea was regulated by the EU regulation, so to say, you would still have local FSAs having different viewpoints as to how things should be working. So all of that, of course, added a lot of complexity. That said, when you found a good way of making it work, it is super efficient. Then there's a lot of strength in having that size of an organization that as long as you go in the same direction, it moves super efficiently, right?
I'm curious, from the teams you led, obviously you have buy-in to deliver strategic initiatives, but because of an organization that large, was there a certain part of the business that became the ultimate decider in this of what you landed on?
Yeah, so you could say that my organization was a Nordic team having Nordic employees and was super specialized within wealth advice, within products, within investments, and so on. So it was kind of a center of excellence, you could say. But in the end, it's always the customer units that is making the final decision because they know exactly what makes sense for the customer. And I think that's exactly how it needs to be. Because that's also the risk of being part of such a big organization, that if you are away from the customer, you can get very far away from the customer. So if you don't let the customer units decide, then you will have a challenge eventually.
All right. So after 18 years at Nordea, you moved over to Nordnet. You delivered a lot of cool projects at Nordea, seemingly a comfortable place to be. What sort of prompted the transition over to Nordnet to take on a new challenge?
So it was actually twofold. It was Nordnet as a company. I, of course, knew Nordnet from outside in, from being the challenger that had a lot of traction in the Danish market, in the Nordic market in general, which was very intriguing to get an inside understanding of how that actually worked. Because one thing is what you can see from the outside, but of course it's different to be on the inside of that. At the same time, I've had a lot of different kind of positions and built a lot of different type of competences. And here you had a role that was very wide, meaning that I could actually try to bridge those competences and utilize them across. So that I really found as super interesting and a good challenge for me personally.
When you first joined, what was the most jarring part of moving from a big institution like Nordea into maybe something a little more flexible, more new, I guess you'd say, like Nordnet?
It was definitely the speed, how fast things could move. Of course, Nordnet is also a Nordic organization. We do prioritization and so on, but it's super efficient in terms of getting things done. And you have a lot of people there who really understands the business end to end. And that means that we can do changes super fast. And the speed, I understood that things were moving fast, but the amount of releases that is coming on an ongoing basis, it's remarkable. We do new releases every third hour. It's that's speed. Yeah,
that is impressive.
Yeah.
And then maybe from a structural perspective, how does Nordnet's business model differ from traditional bank like Nordea?
Nordnet is laser focused on savings and investments only. So that is the only thing that we are doing. And that is a fundamental difference between navigating a traditional bank, which in many cases is a financial supermarket in the sense that you have to focus sometimes on mortgages, sometimes on credit cards, sometimes on savings and investments. But it depends on the sentiment in the market, what is most important, where is the competition moving and so on and so forth. So that is fundamentally different working in Nordnet, where it's always about how do we make sure that we build a one-stop shop for savings and investments, but that is what we want to do. So we get requests from customers who would like to have their daily banking and so on with us, but that's not what we're good at. So we want to focus on what we're good at and be super sharp on that. That is the main difference. And of course, the business model is different. So we don't give investment advice. We let the customers decide themselves. It doesn't mean that we don't want to guide them and so on, but it's much more transaction-based, you could say.
For maybe those who are less familiar with Nordnet, what is Nordnet's position in the market today, and what type of clients do you serve?
It's actually changed quite a bit over the years. So Nordnet has actually existed almost 30 years. And there's no doubt that the outset was different than where we are now. The outset was that we were built to provide institutional terms and conditions for private customers. And that meant that we were targeting very much the active trader segments. That is how we were built, and that is how we started out. Then along the way, we also targeted the investor segment. So still customers that were interested in investing, but not trading as frequently as the active traders. But especially with Corona, things started changing quite a bit also in the Danish market. So you had regular retailers who wanted to start investing. That meant that you had customers who had never invested before, or at least haven't done it themselves, who would like to start investing. And that is where we really saw a change of sentiment. And the good thing is that we have one platform that covers everything. So you have features for both the ones that are super, super active, but also for the ones that doesn't have that much experience with investing. And what we have always tried to be is super user-friendly, because that is what makes the difference. We live off of recommendations from other customers, and that is essentially how we grow. But in Denmark, we've also grown a lot, meaning that now we are 640,000 customers. So and that is something that has really changed during the last 5 years or so.
So do you see Nordnet as a competitor in the existing wealth management space?
Yes.
I'll start with that question.
Yeah, we definitely are. It's not an area in Denmark where we've been growing super proactively, but what you see is that customers, then maybe they transfer a bit of money, they start out with smaller amounts, getting kind of the experience, getting the understanding of how is it to do investments themselves. Then they get comfortable with it, see, okay, this is actually working well. I can do this. I can also save some money while doing it. Then they transfer in more and more. And that means that we also have some very wealthy customers who choose to become customers with us. In December, before Christmas, we launched a new concept for our private banking customers because we definitely see that the demands are changing quite rapidly. We have a massive wealth transfer that is ongoing, and the needs of those customers that are kind of the future of private banking, they change a lot. And we believe that they are actually a super good fit for what we can offer, because again, you have this possibility to have it exactly the way you want it, because you're the one making the decision. So we're not trying to push you into some sort of box and saying this is what we believe is the right thing for you. You know what's right for you. And so we believe that we're already relevant in that area. Yeah.
So with that in mind, you're offering a platform where somebody can get educated quickly. High net worth individuals can come and really own the platform for themselves. But at some point, are you seeing customers needing more than that? Are they then going to transition to a more traditional bank with the limitations within a Nordnet system?
We definitely see that there are customers who needs wealth advice, has a much more complex financial situation and would like to get advice on that, or investment advice. We're not saying that there's anything wrong with getting advice, for sure. So if you want advice, then you should definitely get it. And we are seeing quite a lot utilizing independent advisors, for instance. We're seeing that growing a lot. And we also have individual and independent advisors who are utilizing our platform. So you can actually utilize our platform and get the experience of getting advice, just not from us, but from what we call a partner customer today. And you can then also have money on the side that you decide yourself, for instance, but still work within the platform. So we see a growing interest in that sense, yeah.
So in a platform-driven model where the customer does have a lot of control, how do you think about, I guess, governing that and making sure that compliance stays intact and that what is usually offered in a traditional like wealth advisor role, they get everything they need still?
Yeah, so you can say that the fact that you are a self-directed customer doesn't remove our responsibility to protect them. On an overall level, you can say that we need to make the investors as good investors as they can be, because that will give them a good experience, and that will, of course, make them want to stay with us as a customer, right? So that's kind of the fundamental in all of this. Then we, of course, a regulatory responsibility, meaning that if, for instance, you want to buy a complex product, then we need to do a test to make sure that you understand what it is you're buying. All of that, of course, we have that obligation. At the same time, the fact that we're not giving investment advice doesn't mean we don't want to guide you. So we still want to help you. We want to help you, enable you making the right decision, because it can definitely be difficult to both understand tax regulation. It can be a massive investment universe. Just getting an overview and understanding what is it actually that's in it for me. We're providing screeners and so on, so you can put in what is important for you and do some selection based on that. And I think that is definitely helping out a lot. At the same time, we are trying to give inspiration to the customers. So coming up with what is other people are doing on the platform, making sure that they are always informed about what is happening in the market. We have our savings economist, we have our investment economist who has some very strong insights to the market, but never saying you should buy this or you should sell this. So that's still up to you. And at the same time, we are not pushing customers to trade more than they should or anything like that. I think that is super important. There is these discussions from time to time in terms of the behavior we're seeing in the investor segment. We are putting warnings up when we see, for instance, the pump and dump cases that has been up. There are scams that we're trying to prevent, because again, it will only lead to very, very poor customer experiences, and that is not what we want to provide.
You said something interesting, showcasing to a certain customer segment what other customers are doing. Is that through like an anonymous lookalike segment saying, somebody within your segment or a group of customers is doing this as a guide to, best customers in high net worth segment are doing this, and that's the sort of guidance?
No, it's not exactly like that. It's more on an overall level. What is being traded the most? What is being bought? What is being sold? What kind of themes are other customers looking into? Again, to give an insight as to, okay, what is the private banking customers are doing? What are people doing on the pension side? Because we are also offering pensions. So yeah, to give some inspiration. That's essentially it.
What changes or trends are you seeing in the Danish investor behavior?
We are seeing some quite material changes, and especially being accelerated during the past few years. So we're seeing more and more who is becoming aware of the fact that they need to make a conscious decision around their savings. It doesn't mean that all of them want to invest, but at least they need to understand that this is a decision you're making of something you're not getting if you're not investing. Then you will get, of course, the interest rates, but at the moment they are not very high. So you need to, of course, be aware of that. They are becoming more and more aware of how much things cost, and the fact that it's not about getting to zero. It's not that Danes don't want to pay for investing, but they want to understand what they're paying for, and they don't want to pay for things that they're not utilizing. So the complexity that we've seen previously has led to some mistrust, and that is what we are trying to facilitate, that it's transparent, it's easy to understand what it is that you're paying for, but of course that you are paying, and getting an understanding of that. Then we've seen with the Danish equity account, which is this savings vehicle where you can put in money and at another tax level. That has also given some further push, both in terms of also media interest, and hence also that Danes get a better insight as to wanting to invest. So it's really interesting to see what we are seeing right now. But at the same time, we would like it to go even faster. That is also why we've been pushing, especially politicians, that they need to make it more simple to invest. We see that Danes, the biggest concern is actually not the level of taxation; it's the complexity. So that is what we are trying to explain to politicians at the moment.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I'm curious across, like, so there's something around Danish investor behavior being, more towards self-driven, using a platform like Nordnet, wanting less complexity, et cetera. But are you seeing that breakdown across all age segments? Or you mentioned the transfer of wealth that's occurring, right? Does it tend to then skew towards a younger crowd, or how do you see that break out?
No, we actually see a tendency that it's across all age segments. Mm-hmm. So in the beginning, there's no doubt that a lot of our growth came from young people, but we're seeing a much more diversified crowd of customers at the moment, both in terms of age, but also in terms of gender, for instance, which is really nice to see. We're also seeing more and more parents who wants to invest on behalf of their kids. Previously, it was very much some more maybe super wealthy parents who said that this is something you need to understand and helped their children in that sense. That is becoming more common. It could become even more common, and we would like to see this also being part of the curriculum and so on in schools to kind of avoid the whole social side of it, but making it available for everyone.
Yeah, and essentially what you've created at Nordnet is a low barrier to entry, right? It's
yes.
Stigmatized in the same way because everybody has access.
Exactly. Our vision is to democratize savings and investments, and the only way of doing that is to make it as simple as absolutely possible.
So as country manager for Nordnet, what are your strategic priorities over the next few years for Denmark?
So my main focus is always the customer satisfaction, because again, we live off of recommendations from existing customers, and if they're not happy, they're not going to recommend us. So we will continue to be super sharp on the feedback that we're getting in all types of channels. Here, AI is super helpful in terms of gathering a lot of insights and understanding what are the things that people appreciate, but what are also the development areas, so that we are utilizing in our prioritization. Then we launched the private banking concept, as mentioned before Christmas, and of course we will continue to work on evolving that. This was only the starting point, and we want to continue to grow also with this segment. And then finally, pension is really something we want to change in Denmark, getting this understanding that it's not only your free assets you can invest yourself, it's also your pension, and we believe that there's a whole lot to do in that area. So those are kind of the three main focus areas for me. Mm-hmm.
So I'd probably be remiss not to ask, because you mentioned AI, but maybe as a tool internally. But do you see AI as a growth lever as well?
Absolutely. And I think that AI is going to make a huge difference, both within the more self-directed customers, but also within the advisory part of the business. So I would say that I think we will see more and more push towards the independent advisors if you want advice. But if you could say that AI will be able to cater for a lot in terms of the advisory side. So it's very much about where is it that you can make a difference. And that's going to change a whole lot in terms of that. Then, of course, we're going to see something impacting the self-directed customers in terms of it can be trading algorithms and so on that you all of a sudden can build yourself, and how that can be feeded into our trading platform. So I definitely see AI is going to be a lever also going forward, if we get it right.
Maybe a follow-up to that, and I'm hearkening back to the first part of our conversation, but how far ahead do you see a company like Nordnet in AI compared to maybe an institutional bank like Nordea?
I think that's difficult to compare in that sense. I think everyone is fully aware and investing a lot in terms of AI and how to work with it. I think we've been very good at understanding how this can help us in our way of working, and also scratch the surface in terms of what can impact the customer and how it can be helpful for the customers. But I don't think any of us have seen the true impact of AI yet in terms of the interaction between us and the customers. I definitely think we are in a very good starting point because we are very good at adapting and working with it, and so I'm very comfortable with what we see in the future for now.
All right. So last question. So looking ahead 5 to 10 years, how do you see the relationship between advisory-led wealth management and then digital investment platforms evolving in Denmark?
I think we're going to continue to see a greater fragmentation than we already have. I think there's no doubt that facilitating and supporting the more wealthier segments in terms of having a complex financial situation and giving financial advice, wealth advice, and so on, I think we will continue to see that existing. But we will definitely also continue to see a growth within the independent side, because that's what we've seen so far, and there's nothing indicating why that would stop that direction. So that will, of course, be a massive competition also from the traditional banks, despite of the fact that they have a lot of competences within their banks, of course. And then I would say in terms of the standalone platforms, I think we will only see more fierce competition. At the same time, it depends a lot on the regulatory environment and so on, because customers will still expect that you will get the tax reporting done, that you are meeting local requirements and so on and so forth. And that will, of course, be a differentiator also going forward. So it will be really interesting to see how that will turn out.
That's a perfect ending. Tine, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
That's it for today's episode of Wealth Insider. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find more insight on Performativ.com, and we'll be back soon with more conversations from the people redefining wealth management.